plane is outside.
Yeah, there's a plane.
Oh.
Hey, big cutie, get out of the way.
Hey, good morning, Dr. Strassman.
Big cutie.
Good morning.
Can you hear us as well?
We could try video.
Okay, I
I
mean,
can hear you fine, yeah.
Perfect.
cool. And if you're okay with video,
We
we're
can try video.
okay, cool. That sounds good. So, yeah, thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
You're recording already?
Yeah, this is Angel. My name is Eddie, and this is Caesar.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Mr. Strassman.
Yeah.
Nice
Yeah.
to meet you all.
Sweet.
Well, we just wanted we wanted to say thank you just for coming out and making the time to go have a conversation with us. It was pretty exciting for us to be able to have the chance to talk to you. So glad you're here.
Okay, let me tidy up a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
No problem.
Okay. I think I'm ready if you are.
Cool. So just a little information ahead of time. Our format isn't really interview mode. It's more like informal, just conversation. And obviously, in our case, we want to be able to get more information from the research you've done, and hopefully we can direct that over to the people around us.
Okay.
I can't really hear him.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, if you're ready, we can get started.
Sure. Let's get started. So we have about an hour.
Yeah, right. Around that's the normal time that we go for. Cool. Let's see here.
You think you could bring up the audio a little bit? Is there any way?
The
For
audio?
Caesar? Yeah.
I don't think so. Okay, cool. Do you hear better?
Yeah.
Can
I
you?
can hear.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Let me.
You hear?
Look,
Hmm?
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Yeah, we could hear you good.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So, what's up, everybody? This is Live Locals Podcast, episode 49. And today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Rick Strassman be our guest. And, I know this is going to be a really great conversation today.
Yeah, what's up, guys?
Well, thanks for having me on.
Welcome
today.
back.
Yeah, I mean, so for so we can get started, jump right in, Dr. Strassman. I'm not sure how you want us to refer to you, Dr. Rick Strassman. I don't know. It's all up to you.
You can call me Rick.
Oh,
Sounds good.
okay, cool.
Sounds good, Rick.
So, Rick, for all the people who don't know or have any information about what you've done in the last couple of years in regards to psychedelic, I guess, research, if you want to say, can you give us a little background about, where that research come from or what it contains?
Sure. Well, I guess I got started with this whole field when, as an undergraduate in college, maybe my senior year, junior year, I started thinking about the biology of spiritual experience. And I was brought to thinking about that because of the time and place. I was on the West Coast in the late 60s, early 70s, and there were two new technologies that were making headway onto college campuses as ways to alter consciousness, to produce altered states.
Yes.
One of them was Eastern meditation techniques, like Buddhism, transcendental meditation, that kind of thing. And the other were the psychedelic drugs like LSD and psilocybin. And I was struck by how similar the descriptions were between those two syndromes, the psychedelic drug state and what would happen when you would practice particular kinds of meditation. There'd be visions, there'd be voices, there'd be extreme emotions, new insights, out-of-body experiences, those kinds of things. So, I started off, college as a chemist, and I always was thinking about chemistry. So I was wondering if there might not be some similar chemical reactions going on in the brain when people took psychedelics and when people meditated. So this was around the time that the psychedelic drugs were made illegal.
Hmm.
They were kind of the growth industry in psychiatry in the 50s and 60s, but with uncontrolled use and bad publicity, the government scheduled them, and it was really hard to do research. So at a certain point in college, I decided, that I wanted, to do research with these drugs. I'm above board, scientifically. So I, set that as a goal. In 1972, I kind of had the first flash that I was going to do psychedelic drug research, and there was about generations, um, lag between studies, or human studies anyway. The last new studies with these drugs in humans took place in the early 1970s, and then when I gave my first dose of DMT at the University of New Mexico, it was almost 1991.
Yeah,
So almost
1990.
20 years had elapsed. Uh, so yeah, and I was interested in studying DMT in particular because it's a naturally occurring compound. It's made in the human lungs in particular, quite psychedelic. And I was thinking if 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 I gave DMT to people, and it reproduced certain features of religious experience that aren't related to drugs like meditation or prayer, fasting, near death states, um, I would be able to argue for a role, for naturally occurring DMT in those non-drug spiritual states.
If you don't mind me asking, I know from what I've researched or what I've read into, I know the DM, between for the brain, there's a the blood brain barrier. DMT is supposed to be able to go through easily, right? Because I know most other stuff, the that exists there to stop it from having all these chemicals being shot up to the brain, but DMT it takes it in uh, quickly.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a very interesting property of DMT. You know, well, there were some Japanese studies that took place in the 1970s or 1980s, and there was a recent Brazilian study which demonstrated that the brain expends energy to get DMT across the blood-brain barrier. And as you mentioned, the blood-brain barrier is constructed to keep most things out of the brain, because its defenses aren't that strong, to be able to fight infections and poisons and things. But a small number of substances the brain actually expends energy, to get it across that barrier. Uh, for for example, blood sugar, glucose is transported into the brain. Certain building blocks for proteins, the amino acids, are also transported across the blood-brain barrier, and DMT is too. So that indicates that perhaps DMT is necessary for normal brain function. Which is a strange idea. It's almost like the body's own LSD is necessary for normal brain function. So that makes you kind of wonder about the constructed nature of everyday reality. It's if it turns out that DMT is necessary for normal brain function, one could almost speculate about reality thermostat function for DMT. That the brain requires like a certain narrow window
Yeah.
in order to maintain everyday consciousness. And if concentrations become too high in the brain, then things become quite psychedelic. And if concentrations
Yeah.
become too low, then things flat might flatten out and become dull and gray.
Right.
What's also interesting uh, about DMT is that the gene which is responsible for making the enzyme which synthesizes DMT is quite active in the retina in the eye of primates. So it could be that our visual world is also controlled or mediated or regulated by the production of DMT. So the visual world is mediated by DMT. Everyday consciousness could be mediated by DMT. So it makes you makes you think about that movie The Matrix.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, so so instead of an externally imposed matrix on human consciousness, it might be an internally generated matrix which the body is producing on its own.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the sweet spot of say DMT on a regular average person's body, I guess. What came to my mind, you saying like maybe a little too much DMT in your head. That reminds me of people maybe what somebody would call somebody crazy. Somebody in the street maybe seeing things and not acting normal to the norm, or compared to somebody having low levels. Somebody suffering from depression
Or something.
or some other skewed point of view. On the outlook of life, and it's probably that sweet spot that you're talking about, like just being able to perceive everything as everybody else does. What are some things that could maybe help out like a normal person, maybe to like taper off or even that out? Do you know of anything like that, like maybe sleep or anything like that?
Yeah. Well, um, when scientists first discovered DMT in human blood and spinal fluid, they were obviously like you were thinking about, well, perhaps too much uh, production of DMT is responsible for mental illness, especially psychosis or schizophrenia, where people hear things and see things which most people don't. So there was a lot of effort put into trying to determine if concentrations of DMT in schizophrenia were higher than normal, or if schizophrenics were more sensitive to DMT than normal people. Um, those studies kind of ended inconclusively. Like
Hmm.
it wasn't really clear. By the time the drugs were scheduled and people lost interest in studying DMT, but it's an area which ought to be re-examined. There was a study from Germany a few years ago, where they were starting to look at comparing the DMT state to the schizophrenic state. So if DMT is involved in schizophrenia, for example, if you could block DMT somehow, with a chemical like a antipsychotic drug, like let's say, or turn off the gene which produces or overproduces DMT, you might possibly have a way to treat psychosis. Some of the newer antipsychotic drugs uh, blockade the parts of the brain that the psychedelics affect. Uh, Early on, people were mostly looking at blockading dopamine for antipsychotic or anti-schizophrenic effects. But somebody put two and two together and thought, well, maybe we should see about blocking serotonin sites in the brain as well, because that's where the psychedelics work. So the new drugs for schizophrenia blockade both the dopamine parts of the brain and the serotonin parts of the brain. The ones which psychedelics, including DMT, affect. Um, we really don't know what turns on the DMT gene or what turns it off. That's well, that's an area of research which is just getting off the ground. Concentrations of DMT, which occur normally, are extremely low, like in the trillionths of a gram, per
Oh,
milliliter of blood. And we just don't have, the technology, yet to be able, to measure DMT levels, um, you know, um, which occur naturally. I think what's going to be the case is we'll have to look at the activity of the gene, which, makes the enzyme, which makes DMT. Uh, so you'll want to, turn on that gene or, turn down that gene.
hmm.
Um, so we're just at the beginning. Uh, it's been, kind of a shame that, for 20 years, human research with these drugs was just off the table. But, now that there's an explosion in a lot of ways,
Right.
Yeah.
human studies with these drugs will be able, to revisit a number of the research questions that weren't, uh, taken to completion.
Well, I had a question. I know your initial study started back in 1990, from I believe 1990 to 95. So with that, it's been
Right.
25 years, 26 years up to this point. I was born in 1990, so I recently just started getting into this. So, you know, so I was just a little bit. I wasn't even born. So, to have this information from 20 years ago and to be talking at this point is it's awesome. So, I mean, my question is, it's been 26 years since your initial studies. Have things changed in regards to the way you have access to this? Because I know DMT was really hard, specifically hard early in the beginning for you to get access to. Am I correct?
Hmm. Yeah, it had been 20 years in the U.S. Since a new study with these drugs had taken place in humans. Yeah, so it was a 2-year process to get the DMT to use for my project. DMT is easy to make and from scratch in the laboratory. It's not that complicated. And a lot of people are extracting it from plants you can buy online. But the more difficult part of things were just the regulations. Dealing with the FDA and the DEA. Because things have been reorganized. Since all these drugs had been scheduled. So it kind of required the establishment of a new chain of command or in interactions uh, between between two huge federal agencies. But after a while, I was able to get my permits, and a colleague at Purdue University, Dave Nichols, made the DMT for me. Since my study completed in 1995, quite a few new projects have gotten off the ground, both in the U.S., Germany, Spain, England. Giving these drugs to humans again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was quite a long while in the U.S. Like I started my studies in '90, finished them in '95, and it was maybe 10 years after that that the next human study appeared in the U.S. So it even though I had broken down the regulatory barriers, it still took you know it still took quite a long time for people to catch on that they too uh, could do studies like this. Most of the new projects both in the U.S. and abroad have taken place using psilocybin,
Hmm.
which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms.
Yeah.
Uh, there was one German study giving pure DMT, and that paper came out in 2005 or 2006. Uh, there's a fair there's a fair amount of studies using ayahuasca, which are coming out of Spain and increasingly out of Brazil. And ayahuasca is a plant brew made of a combination of two different plants. One contains DMT, and the other contains a plant which contains an enzyme inhibitor which allows the DMT to be active orally. If you swallow, huge amounts of, DMT, it isn't effective because it's broken down in the gut. But if you can,
Mhm.
if you're able to blockade that breakdown process, using an enzyme inhibitor, then the DMT becomes orally active. So the natives, um, in the Amazon, discovered, stumbled upon, we're told by the plants, that if you can, if you combine one plant that contains DMT and one plant which contains a compound which makes it orally active, then you have an orally active DMT preparation, um, and also that's called ayahuasca, and it's been
Mhm.
used for thousands of years, and it's becoming increasingly popular in both Latin America and in America, Western Europe, Russia, Israel. Um, yeah, so that gives you an oral DMT experience. One of the problems, or one of the hallmarks anyway, of either smoking or injecting DMT is it's extremely rapid, very short-lived. It starts within a few heartbeats, peaks within a minute or two, and it's over within 15 to 30 minutes. So you aren't able really to work with the state that much. But in the case of ayahuasca, where the drug is orally active, it's uh, it takes about an hour to start working. It the peak effects are 3 to 4 hours, um, and you can do a lot more work, psychological work, spiritual work, healing work, with ayahuasca over that longer time span than you can as compared to the very brief blast from smoking or injecting DMT.
So as you said, Rick, your research from 1990 to 95, that's where most of the data is collected on the book DMT, the Spirit Molecule, and also a video documentary. That's the research those two things are referring to, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
So
completed my studies in 1995, and then the book describing behind the scenes account of the research came out in early 2001, and during that study I took a huge amount of bedside notes of people's descriptions of this state, our conversations afterwards,
Mhm.
and it was that information that was the basis of the trip reports, you know, both in the book, and also, the documentary, that you mentioned.
Right.
We interviewed a number of the old DMT volunteers, for that documentary, so, they could tell uh, the story in, their own words and their own voices.
Now, I know you in your new book, DMT and the Soul of Prophecy, you try to make there's a correlation between the experiences that you have under psychedelic, in these psychedelic substances, and the religious experiences as well, right? Spiritual experiences, like I guess religious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. One of the major questions, or major goals of the DMT study, was look the religious or spiritual implications, or even to induce spiritual experiences in the volunteers. And most of the volunteers were practicing some kind of meditation. Well, and I also, came, to the research with a long, background of study and practice of Zen Buddhism, Zen meditation, Buddhist meditation. So all of us were, more or less expecting an enlightenment, a Buddhist enlightenment kind of experience as, the ultimate, DMT effect. Um, so the enlightenment experience, it's, you know, it's what I ended up calling a unitive mystical experience. In other words, there isn't any self. There's a white light. Um, there's no time, there's no space, there's no personality. Um, there isn't any content to speak of other than what's called the experience of emptiness. It's a full emptiness, but still it's empty of concepts, of images, feelings, ideas. But instead, only one of nearly 5 dozen volunteers had that kind of experience. All the rest, for all the rest, the peak, DMT experience was almost like the opposite of the empty enlightenment experience. One maintained their sense of self, the personality. The state was full of images and contents. One can interact willfully with the contents of that experience. One could ask questions, one could receive answers. Um, there was the maintenance of the individual, who was able to carefully observe what was going on, to record in their mind what and what they were feeling. So as time went on, I began to conceive of a different pole of the spectrum of spiritual experiences. Um, like on one hand, there was the unitive, mystical, white light state of Buddhist enlightenment. But on the other hand, there was this interactive, relational kind of state. And in my search, for an interactive, relational, spiritual model, I turned to the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. And in particular, the notion of prophecy, the prophetic states, the prophetic experience, which is extremely interactive and relational. People also describe the DMT experience as quite real, even more real than real, and the Buddhist approach to the visions and the voices generally is that those are unreal. They're just kind of static in the mind-brain complex, which is occurring on the way toward the desired empty enlightenment state. But if I approached people's reports as hallucinations or unreal or dreamlike, people shut down because that was the farthest thing from their reality or from their experience. So like another positive aspect or good quality of looking at the prophetic state is besides the fact that the states of DMT experience and the prophetic state are quite similar. They're also viewed the same way in as much as the prophet or somebody in the Bible in the prophetic state calls it or considers it as real or even more real than everyday reality. So the quality of this state is quite similar between the DMT experience and the prophetic one, and also how one approaches it, feels about it is also quite similar, in that it is more real than everyday reality.
How do you? I mean, what do you think? Do you think these places actually exist outside of the conscious mind? I mean, because all these become objective realities to whoever's taking it, and they're all completely different most of the time. I mean, there's similarities between certain things that they might see, but in a way, they're still experiencing. I guess I want to say a whole complete individual episode.
Right. Yeah. I mean, clearly, that's the $64,000 question. What is the nature of the DMT world? Is it purely generated by the brain? Like some kind of hallucination or a dream, or is it completely another reality or like another level of reality, or some combination. So I'm kind of coming down on the side or the conclusion that it's a combination. It's a you know I think that what we perceive on DMT um, is it isn't only ourselves, but it's colored by ourselves. So it's kind of like a mirror or a window. If it's a very clear window, then what you're seeing isn't as much yourself as what's going on out there, and out there could be different levels of reality, dark matter, parallel universes, um, the spheres, the metaphysical, medieval spheres, um, different different heavens. But if you're not a very clear person, if your psychology, your physiology is all muddled up, then what you're seeing is more of a mirror, more of a reflection of your own personality, your own biology, you know, um, your own conflicts and impulses and drives. So I think that speaks to the importance of working on yourself, before you enter in to these states. Um,
Yeah.
if you've got your if you've got your life worked out, if you're a good person, you know you're not doing bad things. Um, your relationships are clean. Your body is clean. You understand the nature of spiritual realities and the importance of living a good life. Then you're much more equipped, much better equipped to be able to see clearly what these drugs can reveal, and also you're able to understand what's going on in those states, interact with the contents of those states most effectively, remember what goes on, and then be able to communicate and integrate what information you may have received while you're in that altered state.
Yeah. So as you were mentioning, Rick, something that I've noticed, like you said, intravenously and introduction to the body of DMT, like you said, comes on very quickly and ends quickly. And sometimes I hear from people, like in your documentaries and stuff like that, they describe it as being, I guess, so intense or so full of information that sometimes it's hard to
Retain, I guess.
retain or apply sometimes, the things that you saw in there, or the things that you might have seen or heard in there. And as compared to say ayahuasca, that's slower acting and it gives you a longer period to be in the realm and actually bring back stuff, I guess, with you. I guess my question is, how important do you think is the after effect, the after coming back from, say, a trip, and trying to I guess put to use the things, or the things that you might have learned in there. um how crucial do you think that is, that second part, of the trip, actually coming back?
Yeah. Well, there's two parts to your question. One is, on the brevity, or the short duration of the smoke DMT experience. We did a study after the first DMT project, um, where instead of just giving one large dose of DMT, we gave a slightly lower dose, 4 times in the space of one morning, and each of the doses was separated by a half hour. So I think that that in that kind of a model of giving DMT, that that there was a certain continuity from trip to trip to trip, and people had a big experience. They came down, they could talk about it with us and get ready for the next one. Continue working on things during trip number 2, then come down, talk about it with us, get ready for trip number 3. So in a way, it was kind of like a stepwise or stairwise ayahuasca trip, where people went up, came down, went up, came down, over the space of 2 hours, and were able to do good work. And a colleague of mine in Japan, he's a Brit, but he works and lives in Japan. He and I just got a paper accepted for publication, describing a mathematical model for a continuous infusion of DMT, like
Wow.
you just are plugged into an IV, and you can stay on it for as long as you want. Nobody's done that yet.
Yeah.
But the paper describes the model. Like if you're going to do a study like this, this is how you do it. So that paper's coming out in a few weeks.
Oh, cool.
So ayahuasca is kind of a longer acting DMT trip like we've been talking about. So you can work with it more. Kind of like either repeated injections of DMT or in the future a prolonged infusion of the drug. But the other issue that we're talking about is integration. Like what do you do afterwards? Do you just file it away as one of the most interesting things that's ever happened to you, and you gradually forget about it, or do you make it the center point of your life from here on out? So there's obviously quite a few options in between those two extremes, but if you're going to make the most of any experience, spiritual, psychedelic, you need to have it take place in a container or a context, and that context is your life, your relationships with yourself and your relationships with the outside world, including the spiritual world. So that's why I think that once you've had an experience like this, it's important to put it to work within some kind of context, some kind of discipline, and that could be a psychotherapy discipline. Like if you get some insights into your problems or your conflicts when you're tripping on a psychedelic drug, then go and work on it. For example, if you're stuck in a job that's not satisfying or a relationship that isn't satisfying, and you get some insights into those conflicts when you're tripping on DMT or ayahuasca or psilocybin, then find somebody about the and then start working on it, using the extra ammunition or extra fuel or turbocharging which occurred on the trip. If you are drawn towards or have insights of the spiritual nature on a psychedelic trip, then find a religious discipline or a spiritual discipline which makes sense of and can expand and amplify the insights that you were introduced to on the drug. Well, it's interesting. If you look at the whole first generation of Western Buddhist teachers, the ones who are now my age, 60s, early 70s, almost all of them got their first flash of enlightenment on LSD in their 20s, and they had insights into certain truths of Buddhism: impermanence, lack of self, compassion, karma, cause and effect, and so they looked for a religious system which also was interested in these kinds of notions. So they became Buddhist monks or Buddhist teachers or Buddhist lay people. That's kind of one of the dirty little secrets of Western Buddhism, is how it's almost 90 plus percent of the first generation of Western Buddhist teachers got their start, or their first you know uh, glimpse of the possibility of an enlightened way of life through LSD. And that's been written about some. There's a book called Zigzag Zen, which came out a number of years ago, and a new edition was just published last year. And there's a book that came out this year called Altered States, which is a more full description of the relationship between Buddhism and psychedelics. Also, it isn't as well known within the Jewish stream. A large number of renewal rabbis within streams of Judaism, which are more emotional, experiential. They got their start as a result of a flash which they saw on LSD or other psychedelics. That isn't as well publicized as the critical relationship between Buddhism and psychedelics in the West. But I think if one interviews or speaks with the first generation of renewal rabbis, who are also our age or my age, most of them got their start after a big LSD experience, and they wanted to extend and expand that within their own tradition, and look for form of Judaism which could contain those insights. There's other ways. I mean, you could become an artist. For example, based on the aesthetic experiences one has on psychedelics. Look at Alex Gray's art.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Look at Spondel. All that electronic dance music. Um, yeah, you can do all manner of things. I you, the important thing though, I think, is to not let the experience just kind of fritter away. It's just one more experience of being high. So that's why it's important to approach these states with some intent. You really have to work on your intent. And most people, let's face it, use drugs for fun, as opposed for spiritual growth or psychological growth. But if you are uh, into, or if you do have interest in using these states for growth, spiritual growth, psychological growth, intellectual growth, you know then you need to do your homework beforehand, and then continue at it afterwards.
Also, like as you were saying, Rick, actually, you answered one of my questions I was gonna ask you. I was gonna ask you, for the people out there, the I guess the like Lalo said, we were born in the '90s, and your research was being done when we were just kids, and now with the access of information, we're able to come across all these new ideas or these new technologies, like you referred to them earlier, and I know there's a lot of people in our age group that are, they're curious about these things, and some of them, yeah, maybe might want to experiment with these things, I guess, for fun, you
Yeah,
said,
for
or
yeah.
yeah, recreational purpose. But I know there's also like another subset of people that are trying to have personal growth, or go through something, or get through some blockades in their life or something like that. I was gonna ask you, what are some of these things that these people could do to prepare, say, for something like that? And you mentioned intention being super important. Like having an intent why you're gonna do this substance. And I also heard a lot about setting. Can you tell us a little bit about how important that is to some of these, to the taking these substances?
Yeah, well, the stuff, or the material that we've just been covering, more or less is a definition of set and setting. Set is your own personal condition at the time of taking the drug. Are you in a good mood, or are you depressed? Are you in good health, or are you in poor health? are you using other drugs, alcohol, cocaine, marijuana, um, stimulants, those kinds of things or not. Um, Also the set is your psychology. Are you mentally healthy, or do you have um, you know uh, some emotional condition? Also your biology. Is there a family history of any emotional problems, or depression, psychosis, those kinds of things? And set is also on your expectations. What you've heard about the psychedelic drug experience, and also your intent. What you hope to get out of it. Well, the setting is the environment in which you are going to be taking the drug. Are you alone, or in a group, or it's just one or two other people? Who are those people? Is there going to be a leader or not? Is it a research setting, or a recreational setting, or a religious setting? Is it indoors or outdoors? Also the setting includes the set of the people that you're doing the drugs with. So if the set of the people in your environment is bad, let's say they're all high on methamphetamine, and they're kind of biker dudes, and you're afraid around them. The set of the people that you're with is part of the setting as well. Um, I wrote a chapter in a co-authored book that came out a few years ago. The book is called Inner Paths to Outer Space, and I have a chapter in that book which is called Getting Ready for the Journey, or Preparing for the Journey, um, and it really spells out in excruciating detail, the kinds of things you want to be thinking about, and preparing and planning on, before and after any psychedelic experience. Um, if you get on if you get on to my website, which is rickstrassman.com, and you look at and and you click on Inner Paths to Outer Space up in the top ribbon, there's a sample chapter which you can download for free. And the sample chapter is that chapter on getting ready for the journey. So
Oh,
you don't even have to buy the book, to read the
yeah.
chapter.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, like that's pretty useful information. I'm sure people could access it, and make sure they have a safe and I guess productive trip. Like a lot of people in the past aren't well informed, like you're saying, about the importance of setting, and some, I wanted to talk about some stuff in your new book, DMT and the Soul of Prophecy. Um, can you tell us how the research from the original research that they did in 1990 to 95, how did that research come into play with this new book? Did most of the information, or most of the information in this book, were you thinking about these things back in 95 when you were doing the original research? Or is this something that you formulated over time after that research?
Yeah, it was just, well, it's an interest. When I started this study, I had been, thinking about it within the context of Buddhist enlightenment, and had been, talking with the monks at the monastery that, under whose, supervision I had, trained for decades, and most of them in their 20s, uh, got their first flash of enlightenment on LSD, and in their cases, they became, Buddhist monks. And I started to go to the monastery and establish a relationship with that community in my 20s as well. and so over the space of a couple of decades, we were talking about my interest in psychedelics and Buddhism, and they were quite supportive and gave me ideas, and it was all kind of open for discussion. But once I actually began doing the research and started to write and speak about the relationship between Buddhism and psychedelics, the monastery had uh, become established, had become conservative, and was couldn't really kind of talk about psychedelics and Buddhism in the same breath anymore. So that led to some conflicts between me and them, and at a certain point we parted ways, um, because we just couldn't have a
Oh, I think.
mature, open-ended, like in mature adult discussion about the relationship between Buddhist training and the psychedelics. So that gave me the opportunity to return to my own roots, which are Jewish, for two reasons. One as a spiritual home or spiritual community, but the other was that it gave me the opportunity to to revisit the texts which form the basis of the written tradition, which in the case of Judaism is is the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. So I began reading the text, and it started to dawn upon me that there that the descriptions of experiences of people in the Hebrew Bible were quite psychedelic. Uh, there were visions, and there were voices, out of body states, extreme emotions, new insights, powerful experiences, which were quite similar to the reports of my DMT volunteers. In the meantime, when I was working on my DMT book, which came out in 2001, I completed it in the spring of 2000. I was looking at models for uh, how could the DMT state be real, um, as opposed to just a figment of the imagination, or uh, you know you or your brain on drugs, as it were. Like certain parts of your brain just being activated by
Yeah.
DMT. Was there some way, some scientific way to understand the possibility of the DMT state being real? So toward the end of my first DMT book, I bring up the issue, or the ideas of dark matter or parallel universes, those kinds of things, as you know um, models within modern physics, which might help explain how, if on DMT, the receiving characteristics, or the ability of the mind brain complex to perceive things is changed in such a way that we're now able to perceive of the contents of dark matter, or the contents of parallel universes. So that was like an interesting mechanistic model, like how it could work. And I suppose at some point in the future, uh, people could develop a camera that looks into dark matter, could take pictures of the contents, and then
Yeah.
compare those photographs, so to speak, with what people describe on DMT. But that is sometime in the future. Besides, it still really didn't explain why why the brain was wired that way. Why doesn't DMT make you grow an extra nose, as opposed to transporting you into these seemingly independent, freestanding levels of reality? So then I started to look at other models for highly altered states, and obviously one of those models, or one of those disciplines, is the religious perspective. religions are interested in spiritual states and have been entering into them, for millennia. Um, but also, they've developed, ways to extract information uh, from those states, and also they explain, why, the human being is, wired in this way. So I, decided to begin to straddle, as it were, one foot in the religious world and one foot in the, biological world, and that's, when I started to, look into the Hebrew Bible, and especially, the metaphysics, um, or the, theology which was developed in the Middle Ages, by the Jewish, philosophers to, in a way, develop a, scientific model, for the prophetic or, the religious experience. So, that's a, long answer to your question about, like how I, ended up, um, doing a, very, careful, comparison between the DMT state descriptions of my volunteers and the descriptions of, the prophetic state in any of the, figures in the Hebrew Bible. One thing I had to, mention is, my definition of, prophecy is, much more extensive than what usually people think about when you use the word prophecy. The common use is it's, foretelling or predicting the future. But if you, look at the text, I think it makes, more sense, to define a, prophetic state, which is an altered state, and it can contain any of the, hallmarks of a, religious experience, visions and voices, extreme emotions, out of body experiences, physical sensations, new ideas, so, those in, the canonical, prophets like Ezekiel and Isaiah, contain, predictions, but there's quite a few, people who experience those kinds of states, without any foretelling involved. So I include in, my definition of the prophetic experience any state. It could be inspiration like the Psalms, or, Proverbs. It could be dream which, contains, some, prediction. It could be, simply encountering an angel and getting information, from that angel. So in the process of, writing, the new book, DMT and the Soul of Prophecy, I, do an excruciatingly painstaking comparison, between, the prophetic state as I define it, and, the DMT state. And, if you look at the, phenomenology, the contents, the visions and, the voices and the emotions, there's a really, very strong, sense of, similarity between the two states. Uh, but if you look also, more carefully, there's differences as well. Um, like, for example, the DMT state, the volunteers weren't quite able to, pull off the kinds of interactions with the contents of the experience, you know, you, uh, that the prophets or, people in the Hebrew Bible are able to, pull off with, their interactions, with the contents of the state. Also, if you look, more carefully at, the information of, the DMT state and the, prophetic state, then, you know, then, clearly, there's a, lot more information which, has influenced, Western civilization for, thousands of years in the prophetic state. And, the DMT state in particular, the psychedelic state in general, um, the information content, its influence on, culture, civilization, doesn't seem to be quite, getting its, feet on the ground yet.
Hey, I got one more question. Is there, when there's a lot of reports that when people are near death experiences, when they have near death experiences, they have visions of, anything particular. It can be family, it can be, voices or feelings of warmth or light. I know there's also been reports that there's a possibility that DMT can be the cause to that, but is there evidence that can really back that up?
No, not really.
Okay.
It is it's an extremely, well, it's an extremely attractive theory.
Mhm.
Yeah.
To the extent that an near-death experience, shares features with the DMT state, then it makes sense that naturally occurring DMT may be involved. Um, but we still don't really know. Concentrations of DMT are extremely low. So that's one of the things that makes it difficult to state that DMT levels go up as you're dying.
Mhm.
Um, there's a research group in Michigan, um, which is looking at the dying rodent brain, and they're looking at whether DMT levels go up in the brain of dying rodents. So far they haven't been able to find anything. Um, but it's interesting. There's a group in Hungary, which is very keen on the relationship between DMT and the dying process and death, and so they're finding out that DMT protects the brain from brain damage resulting from lack of oxygen. So that supports the
Hmm.
idea
Mhm.
that perhaps DMT may be protective of the brain in situations of low oxygen, like before you, well, so before you die. um, so it could be that the visions and the voices that people experience as they're dying could be related to an increase of DMT, which is being released in order to protect the brain. uh,
Yeah.
but still, it kind of but it's it still raises the question, if DMT is protecting the brain, that wouldn't necessarily mean it would need to produce visions and voices.
Mhm.
Why couldn't it just make you kind of enter into a black, dreamy, warm and fuzzy state, as opposed to all of these visions. So I think that the two features are related as opposed to independent. In other words, I think, but it still has yet to be proven, that DMT released at the time of death provides a bridge for one's consciousness between life and what occurs after life. And at the same time, it could be neuroprotective, or help protect the
Mhm.
brain as it's struggling to survive.
Wow. I mean, that's
Pretty
a
intense.
yeah, that's really intense. It's a lot of, to me, for personally, just for me, it was a lot of the information that was I was looking at was at some point overwhelming. So I'm sure that to a lot of other people who are who are not really into this subject, they're gonna be like, what, that it's a whole, you know.
Yeah, it's a whole new avenue. Like as of recent times, we've come across information like psychedelics and all these new things. There's a lot of people out there that still maybe not in the lookout or like informed
Right.
about them, and it's good to hear like somebody like you doing actual research and trying to get the info out there, so people in the future could safely use these things, or get to use them to their full potential. Like a lot of substances out there aren't used to their full potential, and it's people like you who are gonna push through and get the full power, the full potential of these substances to the public.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it's true, that one needs to look at the beneficial potential of these drugs, but still, I think that they're just tools, and they can be misused too. I mean, look at Charlie Manson and LSD and his murders in
Yeah.
L.A. in the late '60s. Um, the Nazis like using LSD and like using mescaline. Ernst Jünger was a Nazi from post World War One, post World War Two, who was really good friends with Albert Hofmann, the discoverer of LSD, and the two of them used to trip together. And Ernst Jünger is kind of a poster boy for the neo Nazis, even though he's been dead for quite a while. And I've seen people abuse psychedelics, either in a self-destructive way, or they use them to manipulate other people in a horrible manner. So I don't think these are necessarily only good drugs. I think that they have to be used with the proper intent if you're going to have proper results. They're kind of like nuclear power. They could provide electricity for a city, or they could blow that city up. So
Yeah.
I think that just it's a question of education. If people are ignorant about these drugs, then they could be either underused or misused. So I think what's key is to get the information out there, let people decide for themselves, and then decide what they want to do. Um, there was something else. Oh, so there's a couple of avenues. You could use these drugs for yourself, if you wish. But also I think there's a lot of research that needs to be done, both scientific research, biological, religious research too. And since my study opened the door in the U.S. for doing this kind of work with humans again, there's been quite a surge of interest in doing research again. Uh, there's probably a scientific paper per month that's coming out now. Describing either the therapeutic effects, or the religious effects, or the brain function effects of various psychedelics. So Terence McKenna was a good friend, and popularized psychedelics quite a bit, including DMT. And he used to joke about why isn't DMT on the front page of the New York Times in huge font. There's this compound that that the human body makes, which within a heartbeat transports you to these absolutely indescribable realms. Why isn't a lot more money going into research to understand what is the role of DMT? Why is it there in the body? What's it good for? So even though people are looking at psilocybin and LSD, that's all good and well, but I think if we really want to delve deeply into the nature of reality, I think there's a lot more bang for the buck when it comes to DMT than these other substances.
And last question. um, what do you see the research for DMT being in 20 years from today?
Um, well, I think it could be applied in the same, way that other, psychedelics are. For psychotherapy, depression, OCD, anxiety. Maybe even start to, look at the biology of, psychosis. Um, develop new, treatments, for psychosis. Uh, by modifying the physiology of DMT, substance abuse. There's spirituality research too occurring with the psychedelics, especially psilocybin. Can it be used uh, to enhance one's meditation practice or prayer practice, those kinds of things. Um, I think one of the unique aspects of DMT though is its uh, you know is its uh, is its ability to, to transport people into these seemingly freestanding, levels of an alternate reality. So I think with this infusion, protocol that we just published, keeping people in, the DMT state, for hours on end, you know, if that's the goal, I think, it would be, possible to look at that state more carefully, to interact, with the beings which are often described as existing within the DMT state, to to explore that realm in a more leisurely and intensive manner. Kind of like Columbus, discovering America. Like it wasn't like he just spent 20 minutes there. He spent a long time there, and you really can't get the full lay of the land with DMT in the space of 10 minutes. You need to
Right.
Be able to look around, get your bearings,
Yeah.
talk to the inhabitants, look at the rocks, chip them, that kind of thing. And with the prolonged immersion in the DMT state, I think we can look at some of the fundamental questions that address the the tool of human consciousness, to explore non-ordinary reality.
Wow. Well, I mean, it sounds like a crazy ride in the next couple of years. And hopefully, obviously there's still people, there's still people like you going out there and pushing this and bringing it to the masses, and I think that's important. I have never, at this point, I have not tried any of these DMT experiences. I've yet to do any psilocybin or anything, but I'm really interested in what they offer and what hopefully at some point I can experience for myself. And
Yeah, and it's good to know, like you said, there's a link. Well, like you said, there's a link on your website. Real quick, it's good to know that people could inform themselves, and prepare. If you're curious about it, then prepare yourself and take your time with it.
Yeah, it isn't anything you want to jump into, and like you were saying, you can download that chapter on getting ready, from my website for free, and read it. That would be a start. That would give you the information that you need to begin to work on getting ready. And then take it from there.
cool. Well, I mean, if people want to find your work, I know you mentioned earlier your website, rickstrassman.com. Is there any other place where people can find your books or find more information on you?
Well, with respect, to interviews and things like that, public appearances, I've also got a Facebook page, so you could keep an eye on that. And you can buy books through my site. I'll inscribe them and sign them for you. Or you can buy them on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any of the usual places.
Okay, cool. Well, I mean, I appreciate your time, Dr. Strassman, for coming on and talking with us. I feel like I can walk out of here way more informed than with what I started, and I appreciate that.
Well, good. Yeah, I enjoyed our time together. Yeah, so let me know, when the interview's up and the URL, and I'll post it on my Facebook and on my website.
Cool. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds good, Rick. As of my part, we knew we were gonna interview a while back, and we got a chance to, download your books on Audible for my part, and listen through them, and it was really cool. Getting this information through the audio, and then, getting it straight from you as well. It painted a more clear picture. And thank you again for joining us. That was really cool. Getting to chat with you.
Okay, well, my pleasure. And, good luck to all of you guys, too.
You too, man. Good
Thank
luck
you.
in the future, Rick.
Enjoy the rest of your week.
Okay.
Thanks
This
a
is
lot,
live.
sir.
You too. Okay,
See ya.
bye.
This is Live Locals.
Peace out, guys.
Wow, dude,
Okay,
listening
good.
to that guy made me
So-
feel like I was on DMT.
Yes. All right, Dr. Strassman.
Nice.
Right on. Dude, did he hear me?
What did he say?